History loves its conquerors, but what about the moments when conquest nearly ends in a pool of blood? When the mightiest warrior kings face their mortality not on a glorious battlefield, but in the treacherous shadows of their own homes. This is the story of Shaka Zulu, the man who transformed a small clan into the most feared military force in southern Africa, who revolutionized warfare itself, but who survived an assassination attempt that would drive him to madness and ultimately seal his own doom. Picture this: the most powerful man in Africa, wounded and paranoid, declaring that his entire kingdom must stay awake forever. No one sleeps, no one rests, until he says so. But how does a brilliant military tactician, a man who united dozens of tribes through strategic genius and terrifying warfare, become so consumed by fear that he condemns his own people to endless vigilance? How does the king who conquered half of what is now South Africa transform from protector to tormentor in a single night? To understand this moment of madness, we must journey to the heart of the Zulu kingdom in 1827, where the greatest African military leader of all time ruled over 250,000 people through a combination of revolutionary tactics, absolute loyalty, and increasingly unpredictable brutality. This was a world where your survival depended on the mood of one man, where a single gesture of disrespect could mean death for your entire family, and where the most powerful army on the continent existed solely to serve the vision of its brilliant, terrifying king. The assassination attempt that changed everything began not with the enemies Shaka had conquered, but with the people closest to him, his own blood. Because in the deadly game of African politics, sometimes your greatest threat sleeps in the same royal compound, shares your meals, and calls you brother. Born around 1787, as an illegitimate child to Chief Senzangakona, young Shaka entered the world already marked by controversy. In traditional Zulu society, his very existence was an embarrassment, the product of forbidden intimacy between his father and Nandi, a woman from the Langeni clan. When Nandi's pregnancy became obvious, the elders dismissed it as Ishaka, meaning intestinal beetle, claiming no child was coming. That dismissive word became his name, Shaka. Exiled with his mother to live among her people, Shaka grew up as an outcast among outcasts. The Langeni clan treated him and his mother as unwelcome burdens, subjecting them to daily humiliation and scorn. But rather than breaking young Shaka's spirit, this cruel treatment forged something extraordinary, a burning determination to prove that the illegitimate child they mocked would one day make them all kneel. You're witnessing the birth of a military genius in the most unlikely circumstances. Picture this awkward, tall teenager, already showing signs of the imposing physical presence he would become, but still enduring the taunts of his peers. They called him names, excluded him from games, and questioned his legitimacy at every turn. What they didn't realize was that each insult was teaching him something invaluable about human psychology, about the power dynamics that ruled tribal society, and about the burning desire for respect that would one day reshape the entire region. Everything changed when Shaka caught the attention of Dingiswayo, chief of the Mthethwa Confederation. Dingiswayo possessed something rare among African leaders of the time, vision that extended beyond immediate tribal boundaries. He saw potential in the bitter young outcast and invited him to serve in his military forces. For Shaka, this was more than opportunity. It was salvation. Under Dingiswayo's mentorship, Shaka's natural military instincts exploded into revolutionary innovation. While other warriors still fought with long throwing spears in loose formations, Shaka developed something entirely different. He created the Ikalwa, a short stabbing spear with a broad blade designed for close combat. But the weapon was only part of his genius. The real innovation was tactical. Shaka introduced the bullhorn formation, where warriors would engage the enemy center while two flanking groups, the horns, would encircle and destroy them completely. No prisoners, no survivors to carry tales or seek revenge. This wasn't just warfare. It was psychological domination through total annihilation. His first major test came during a campaign against the Buthelezi clan. Traditional Zulu warfare was ritualistic. Warriors would hurl spears at each other from a distance, with casualties remaining relatively light. Combat often ended when the first few men fell, with honor satisfied on both sides. Shaka shattered these conventions completely. When the Buthelezi warriors lined up expecting traditional combat, Shaka's forces did something unprecedented. They dropped their throwing spears, drew their short stabbing spears, and charged directly into close combat. The psychological shock was devastating. Enemy warriors, trained for long-distance fighting, found themselves face-to-face with disciplined killers who fought as a coordinated unit rather than individual heroes seeking personal glory. The slaughter was so complete, so shocking, that surviving Buthelezi warriors spread tales of supernatural warriors who fought like demons. This was exactly what Shaka wanted. Victory through terror that would make future enemies surrender before fighting ever began. But this first triumph revealed something disturbing about Shaka's character. When his own warriors showed mercy to wounded enemies, Shaka executed them on the spot. An enemy who lives today becomes a stronger enemy tomorrow, he declared. This wasn't just military strategy, it was the philosophy that would eventually consume him. When Dingiswayo was murdered by the Ndwandwe chief Zwide in 1818, Shaka seized his moment. Rather than mourning his mentor's death, he used it as justification for what would become the most aggressive military expansion in African history. Within months, he had united the remaining Mthethwa forces with his own Zulu clan and launched a campaign of conquest that would earn him the name the Black Napoleon. The transformation of the Zulu military under Shaka's leadership was nothing short of revolutionary. He instituted a regimental system where young men lived in military barracks called kraals, isolated from civilian life and completely devoted to warfare. Marriage was forbidden until a warrior proved himself in battle, creating an army of celibate soldiers with no divided loyalties. Physical conditioning became legendary. Shaka forced his warriors to run 50 miles per day across rough terrain, barefoot. When they complained about thorny ground cutting their feet, he ordered them to dance on thorns until their feet became calloused enough to run across any surface. Those who couldn't keep up were executed immediately. This wasn't just military training. It was the creation of a superhuman fighting force through brutal selection. The military innovations continued. Shaka developed the washing of the spears doctrine. No warrior could return from battle until his spear had been bloodied in enemy flesh. He created age-based regiments with distinctive uniforms and fierce competition between units. Most importantly, he revolutionized military intelligence, establishing a network of spies and scouts that gave him detailed information about enemy movements, strengths and weaknesses, before battles even began. The first major test of Shaka's new military system came against the Ndwandwe Confederation in 1819. Zwide commanded over 18,000 warriors and had already proven his skill by defeating Dingiswayo. This wasn't just warfare. This was a contest to determine who would dominate southeastern Africa. Shaka's tactical brilliance shone in the campaign's opening moves. Rather than meeting Zwide's massive army in direct confrontation, he employed a scorched earth strategy, evacuating civilians and destroying all food sources in Zwide's path. The Ndwandwe army found themselves marching through empty lands, their supply lines stretched thin, their warriors growing hungry and demoralized. When Shaka finally chose to engage, it was at the Battle of Gokli Hill on terrain he had selected and prepared. The Ndwandwe forces, expecting traditional warfare, instead faced something unprecedented, a perfectly coordinated military machine that moved as one organism. The bullhorn formation encircled them completely. The short stabbing spears made their long throwing spears useless. The disciplined Zulu warriors showed no mercy, no hesitation, no individual initiative that might compromise the battle plan. The slaughter was so complete that Zwide fled with only a handful of survivors. But Shaka wasn't finished. He pursued the broken Ndwandwe forces, hunting down survivors, destroying their villages, and absorbing their remaining warriors into his own army. This wasn't just military victory, it was the complete erasure of a rival power. The psychological impact rippled across the region. Dozens of smaller chiefs surrendered immediately rather than face Shaka's military machine. Others fled hundreds of miles to escape the expanding Zulu kingdom. The period became known as the Mifekane, or the Crushing, as displaced populations created a domino effect of warfare and migration that reached as far as modern-day Tanzania. By 1824, Shaka's kingdom stretched across 11,500 square miles, encompassing nearly 250,000 people. His standing army numbered 40,000 warriors, organized into regiments with specialized functions and unwavering loyalty to their king. He had achieved something unprecedented in African history, the creation of a centralized military state that could project power across vast distances. But absolute power began revealing the darker aspects of Shaka's personality. His earlier pragmatic ruthlessness evolved into increasingly erratic behavior. Warriors could be executed for minor infractions. Civilians faced death for failing to show proper enthusiasm during royal ceremonies. Most disturbing of all, Shaka began viewing any sign of independence thought as potential treason. King, who had once inspired fierce loyalty through military genius and shared hardship, now ruled through terror and unpredictable violence. His closest advisors walked on eggshells, knowing that yesterday's favor could become tomorrow's death sentence. The brilliant tactician was becoming a paranoid tyrant, and everyone in the kingdom could sense the dangerous shift in their leader's character. The stage was set for the night that would change everything. When Shaka's own paranoia would create the very conspiracy he feared most. The assassination attempt began with grief. In October 1827, Shaka's beloved mother, Nandi, died suddenly, and the king's reaction was so extreme that it terrified his own people. He declared that no crops could be planted, no milk could be consumed, and any woman who became pregnant during the mourning period would be killed along with her husband. The entire kingdom was ordered to mourn exactly as Shaka mourned, with the same intensity, the same despair, the same complete abandonment to grief. But even this wasn't enough for the grieving king. Shaka ordered the execution of 7,000 people because their mourning didn't seem genuine enough to him. Warriors who had served him faithfully for years were killed because they appeared too composed at his mother's funeral. Civilians died because they couldn't produce tears on command. The man who had built a kingdom on military discipline and strategic thinking had descended into complete emotional chaos. His half-brothers, Dingane and Malangana, watched this madness with growing alarm. These weren't distant relatives plotting from afar. They were members of Shaka's inner circle, men who had benefited from his rise to power, but now found themselves increasingly endangered by his unpredictable fury. Every day brought new executions, new impossible demands, new evidence that their brother was losing his grip on reality. The brothers began meeting in secret with Mbopa, Shaka's personal servant, who had watched the king's descent into paranoid tyranny with growing horror. What started as worried conversations about Shaka's mental state gradually transformed into something more dangerous, a conspiracy to remove the king before he destroyed the entire kingdom. The plan was simple, but required perfect timing. They would wait for a moment when Shaka was isolated from his bodyguards, strike quickly, and then present his death to the kingdom as necessary for everyone's survival. What they didn't anticipate was that Shaka's paranoia had made him extraordinarily alert to exactly this kind of danger. On the night of September 22nd, 1828, everything went wrong. The conspirators approached Shaka's compound after most of the household had retired. Intelligence suggested the king was alone, reviewing military reports as was his custom. But Shaka had been setting traps for potential assassins, varying his routines and testing the loyalty of everyone around him. When his half-brothers entered his quarters with weapons drawn, he was ready. The attack was vicious, but not immediately fatal. Shaka fought back with the same fury that had made him legendary on the battlefield. But he was outnumbered and caught off guard. Stabbing spears found their mark, but none delivered a killing blow. In the chaos of close combat, with blood flowing and weapons clashing, Shaka managed to escape the initial assault and flee into the night. Picture the most powerful man in Africa, wounded and bleeding, stumbling through his own royal compound while his brothers and closest servant pursued him with murderous intent. This was the moment when Shaka's military genius served him one final time. Even wounded, he knew the terrain, knew the hiding places, knew how to survive. He made it to a grain storage hut and barricaded himself inside, his wounds serious but not fatal. From this refuge, he could hear his would-be assassins searching for him, calling out in voices that mixed false concern with barely concealed frustration. They needed to find him and finish what they had started. But the darkness and Shaka's intimate knowledge of his own compound gave him precious time to think. That's when the wounded king made the declaration that would define his final months. If he could trust no one, if his own brothers would try to murder him in his sleep, then no one in the entire kingdom would ever sleep again. Guards would maintain constant vigilance. Servants would work in shifts throughout every night. Warriors would patrol in rotating units that never rested. If Shaka couldn't sleep safely, then sleep itself would be banished from the Zulu nation. When dawn broke, Shaka emerged from hiding to find his assassins had fled, probably believing they had succeeded in killing him. But instead of dying, he had transformed once again, this time from paranoid tyrant into something far more dangerous. A wounded king who now saw enemies in every shadow and trusted absolutely no one. The decree went out immediately. Effective immediately, no person in the Zulu kingdom would sleep during nighttime hours. Anyone caught sleeping after sunset would be executed along with their family members. This wasn't just paranoia. It was the systematic torture of an entire population by their increasingly unhinged leader. The no-sleep decree lasted for months, creating suffering on an unimaginable scale. Pregnant women miscarried from exhaustion. Warriors became too tired to train effectively. Farmers couldn't work efficiently during the day because they were forced to stand guard at night. The entire kingdom began to deteriorate under the weight of their king's paranoid madness. But Shaka's survival of the assassination attempt had achieved exactly what he intended. It demonstrated that he was too dangerous, too cunning, and too resilient to kill easily. His half-brothers retreated and waited, knowing that another failed attempt would mean their deaths, and the deaths of everyone they had ever cared about. The kingdom limped along under these impossible conditions until Shaka finally decided to launch a massive military campaign against distant enemies. This would be his greatest expedition yet, a chance to rebuild his army's morale through conquest and to remove himself from the toxic atmosphere of his own court. But it also represented the opportunity his enemies had been waiting for. On September 22, 1828, exactly 1 year after the first assassination attempt, Dingaan and Malangana struck again. This time, they chose their moment more carefully, ensuring that Shaka was truly isolated and that their weapons would find their mark. The king, who had survived one assassination attempt and terrorized his kingdom for a year, with his paranoid vigilance, was finally killed by the same brothers who had failed to kill him the year before. The irony was perfect and terrible. Shaka's survival of the first assassination attempt had bought him exactly 1 year of additional life. But it had been a year that transformed him from a brilliant military leader into a figure of terror, even among his own people. His attempt to protect himself through absolute vigilance had created the very conditions that made his eventual assassination inevitable. Dingain took power immediately and reversed the no-sleep decree. But the damage was done. The Zulu military system never fully recovered from the months of enforced sleep deprivation. More importantly, the kingdom's social fabric had been torn apart by a year of mutual suspicion and terror. Shaka's legacy remains complex and controversial. He was undeniably a military genius who revolutionized African warfare and created the most powerful kingdom in the region's history. His tactical innovations influenced military thinking far beyond Africa, and his organizational skills transformed a minor clan into a major power. But he was also a man whose brilliance was inseparable from his brutality, whose strategic thinking coexisted with increasing paranoia and cruelty. The night he survived assassination and declared that no one would sleep again reveals something profound about the nature of power and fear. Shaka's attempt to achieve perfect security through total control ultimately made him less secure, not more. His refusal to trust anyone created a world where no one could trust him. His effort to eliminate all potential threats transformed him into the greatest threat his own kingdom faced. Modern historians debate whether Shaka was a visionary nation-builder or a bloodthirsty despot. But perhaps that's the wrong question. He was both. And the assassination attempt that he survived shows us how closely connected these aspects of his character really were. The same paranoid intelligence that made him a brilliant military tactician also drove him to terrorize his own people when he felt threatened. In our own time, when leaders around the world struggle with questions of security and trust, Shaka's story offers a stark warning about the costs of absolute power and the dangers of letting fear drive political decision-making. The king who united tribes through strength ultimately divided his own kingdom through suspicion. What would you have done in Shaka's position? When surrounded by potential assassins, is paranoia a rational response or a path to self-destruction? And how does a leader maintain security without destroying the very thing they're trying to protect? The man who declared that no one would ever sleep again ultimately learned that some forms of vigilance are indistinguishable from madness, and that the attempt to achieve perfect safety can become the most dangerous thing of all. If this incredible story of power, paranoia, and the ultimate price of absolute rule has fascinated you, there are countless other underrepresented historical narratives waiting to be explored. What other brilliant leaders made decisions that sealed their own fate? What other moments in history reveal the thin line between genius and madness? Let us know in the comments. Do you think Shaka's response to the assassination attempt was justified? Or had he already crossed the line into tyranny? What's your take on his complex legacy as both nation-builder and destroyer?